Good morning and welcome to Rising. What we have for you today is a show, and we're about to get to it. Hi, Jessica. Thanks for joining me.
You're really setting up realistic expectations, Robbie.
We're all about realistic expectations here at Rising. All right, let's get right to it. This is a story that I found particularly interesting, Jessica. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg admitted that the Biden administration repeatedly pressured Meta to censor content, including information about Hunter Biden, and Zuck admitted that he also regrets complying with these demands. Fascinating. Zuckerberg has provided the House Judiciary Committee with thousands of documents as part of its investigation into content moderation online. In a letter to the House Judiciary Committee chairman, Representative Jim Jordan, Zuck writes, quote, "The FBI warned us about a potential Russian disinformation operation about the Biden family and Burisma in the lead up to the 2020 election. That fall, when we saw a New York Post story reporting on Joe Biden's family, we sent that story to fact checkers for review and temporarily demoted it." For context, the New York Post first reported the Hunter Biden laptop story, which mainstream media initially claimed was disinformation. Zuck goes on to write, "In 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree. I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it. I also think we made some choices that we wouldn't make today." He then says he regrets demoting the Hunter Biden laptop story. Meta no longer temporarily demotes things in the U.S. while waiting for the independent fact checkers.
Now, an account associated with the House Judiciary Committee reacted on X, writing, quote, "Mark Zuckerberg just admitted three things. One, Biden-Harris administration pressured Facebook to censor Americans. Two, Facebook censored Americans. Three, Facebook throttled the Hunter Biden laptop story. Big win for free speech." Elon Musk wrote on X, quote, "Sounds like a First Amendment violation." Entrepreneur and podcaster Patrick Bet-David wrote, quote, "Mark Zuckerberg just admitted to working with the Biden-Harris administration to censor Americans. He either admitted to this because, one, he's being honorable, two, he's done with the Democratic Party, three, he's getting ahead of a whistleblower. Either way, this is a very hard letter to write." Reacting to the letter, the White House said in a statement, quote, "When confronted with a deadly pandemic, this administration encouraged responsible actions to protect public health and safety. Our position has been clear and consistent. We believe tech companies and other private actors should take into account the effects their actions have on the American people while making independent choices about the information they present." So, Robbie, we covered a story here on Rising about the United States actually pushing vaccine disinformation about the Chinese manufactured virus while at home censoring any misinformation on our online platforms. It just feels like a double standard.
100%. I'm so grateful to Mark Zuckerberg for writing this very frank letter detailing how Facebook, Instagram faced this pressure from the federal government, and he says they caved to this pressure and he regrets doing it. I think I encourage everyone to go read this letter. I think it's very thoughtful and heartfelt. He says, look, they came to us, they said do this and this and that, and we were uncomfortable with some of it, but we eventually went along with it, and that was a big mistake because what they were saying has not stood up to the test of time on the COVID front and on the Hunter Biden front. He says that, demoting that story while the fact checkers did their work was absolutely the wrong call. They don't do that anymore. They would not make that call again. He said the COVID stuff was too heavy-handed. He's saying that it's real. The pressure campaign from the federal government was real. Exactly what we've covered on the show so exhaustively, what the Twitter files and my own work on the Facebook files revealed is that social media moderators faced incredible pressure from the federal government and were uncomfortable. They didn't always agree. They didn't think the federal government was right about a lot of these topics, of identifying accounts as bots. They had evidence, the Twitter moderators had evidence that these weren't even bots in a different situation, but they went along with it because the pressure was too great. Yes, I think that ought to be ruled to have violated the First Amendment. The Supreme Court didn't see it that way, or because of a standing issue in the case. There might have to be another Supreme Court case. Maybe they would decide differently. But, Mark Zuckerberg comes in for a lot of, in the past, has come in for a lot of criticism, honestly, from Democrats and Republicans, but particularly for people on the right who have vilified him tremendously over the years. Look, I have absolutely disagreed with a lot of content moderation decisions at Facebook. It sounds like Zuckerberg disagrees with them too. And you know what? Better late than never. It's better to recognize what you got wrong and pledge to do it differently than try to gaslight everyone to saying none of this censorship exists. What are you talking about? So I appreciate this letter. I'm glad he said it, and I hope the policies would be different in the future.
Right. I think that, Mark Zuckerberg might draw the line somewhere differently than the Biden-Harris administration would on a lot of these issues. I think the Hunter Biden laptop story, now that we have a lot of evidence about what was actually in the laptop, I can imagine a world where he regrets suppressing any news about the laptop. I can also imagine a world where he believes the COVID misinformation went too far, censoring, sarcastic posts, satire, things of that nature, people joking around. It's really hard for any kind of automated algorithm to tell the difference between what is satire and what is intentional misinformation. That's something that humans are much better at. AI is not quite there yet. But I can imagine he wishes he drew the line somewhere differently. But I still think Mark Zuckerberg is the kind of guy that does believe in some censoring of misinformation on the platform. But going the route of having independent fact checkers employed working full time, that's just an expense that I think a lot of social media companies need to have on their balance sheets. And it's something that I think originally they weren't accounting for because social media was kind of this website where you could connect with your friends. Now it's a place where people get news. And I'm sorry, but if you want that ad revenue, you're going to need to make that investment at this day and age. And let's not forget that X, when it was known as Twitter in 2020, was pushing vaccine misinformation stories. It was in the Philippines, as I mentioned earlier. But if you look at the death toll, it was under 10,000 at the beginning of this campaign that was reported by Reuters. Now it's just below 50,000, or at least that's where it was when they stopped collecting this data for the Philippines in October of 2021. So towards the end of this misinformation campaign about the vaccines. So it's just ridiculous that the American government can say, we want people to be healthy. This is a pandemic. We want to do things in the interest of the public's health. But then if we have political interests somewhere else abroad, which we have for many, many years in the Philippines, we're totally fine with doing away with that, not realizing we live in a global system. What if someone in the US goes on vacation in the Philippines, contracts the virus, and brings it home? That affects the US population. This idea that the United States fighting for their interests in another country and fighting for different leadership in another country has no ramifications for the quality of life of Americans at home. It's either something they don't understand that that's a reality. I find it hard to believe the CIA doesn't understand that and the US military doesn't understand that. It's seemingly like they don't care. And so the misinformation coming from the government seemingly comes in the direction of a political party's interests in regard to the Hunter Biden laptop story. And in regard to COVID, I think there's probably going to be some medium that's struck of you can't post fake articles that look like they're real, portraying some scientific information.
Well, yeah.
But if someone's making jokes about the vaccine, those posts seemingly should fly.
Yeah, look, there's going to be some moderation on social media. Well, look, it's fine. There's different social media sites, and different sites can have different rules and different levels of moderation. I think the best thing is to put as much choice and control in the users and have different experiences across different platforms, or maybe even different settings for how much exposure you want, even to political content at all. Maybe some people don't just want to turn that off, and they should be able to customize their experience to match what they want, and the platforms can be responsive to the users. On most major platforms, there's going to be some level of moderation because most people actually they don't want censorship of contrarian political topics, but they want persistent harassment filtered out of the site. They want spam taken down. They want those kinds of things. But the big point, I think, is that moderation should be decided on by the platform. Should be in conversation with their users and delivering the best user experience. And if that's very maximal free speech on some sites, great. If that's something else on a different site, okay, whatever. But it just shouldn't be dictated by federal bureaucrats who themselves ought to be constrained by the First Amendment. And the only other thing I wanted to mention here is Zuckerberg I think he's making a political calculation as well. He had a phone call to Donald Trump right after the assassination saying he regretted some moderation of the picture that took place. He said he's not, giving money to the election-related organizations. He wants to be perceived as politically neutral. He wants the sites to be perceived as politically neutral. And I think that's probably a good business decision for him and will ultimately end up being a good decision from the standpoint of maximizing free speech on the platform. Got to get to some additional topics. We'll be back with more Rising right after this.